Well, Morena, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 19 August full council meeting. Nice to see you all here at an unusual time, 10:30 rather. It feels odd. We usually hear it a little earlier, but there you have it. So we've all got our agendas in front of us. And Dale-Marie, could I please invite you to open us today with the karakia? That would be much appreciated.
Malo elelei e te whare, ko tēnei te wiki o te reo Tongan, so it's Tongan Language Week, so I'm just going to mihi to them. I runga I te āhuatanga o te koroneihana, he mihi ki tō tātou kingi, tūheitia me te whare kāhui ariki rire hau pai mārire. Ko rangi ko papa ko ka puta ko rongo, ko tani mahuta, ko tangaro, ko tūmataumia, ko haumia tiki teke, ko tāwhiri mātia. Tokono rā ko rangi ki runga ko papa ki raro ko puta ki te ira tangata, ki te whaiao, ki te ao mārama, ti hei mauri ora. Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, thank you, Dale-Marie. Thank you very much for that. Right, moving on then to our apologies. I don't believe we have any. We look to be a full complement today. So skipping past that on to then disclosures of members' interests. I'm not aware of there being any. Certainly I'm not in receipt of declarations from anyone. Perfect. Then the next item, again, another piece of housekeeping. I'm not aware of there being any late items either. Confirmation of the order of the meeting. I'm happy to move that is recorded correctly in our agenda, and Councillor St Pierre will second that for me. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Cool. Right, on to our first substantive item, and this is one of Joe Greed's. Good morning, Joe. Nice to see you. A Local Government New Zealand Annual General Meeting representation. Obviously, the conference is this week, and Joe will take you through paper.
Good morning, everyone. So the purpose of this report is just so we can appoint voting delegates for the AGM, which will be held later in the week. So we've got there, we have one presiding delegate, which is appointed, and then we also just appoint an alternate presiding delegate if for any reason that presiding delegate could not be in the room at the time that the vote takes place. Any questions?
Roger will move that and Lou will second that. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Just as an aside, they were using some new technology, this AGM, for purposes of voting. So it's all very secret squirrel. So yeah, it was a little bit different to other years. So we'll see how that one goes. Righty ho, moving on then to our major item on our agenda, which is Plan Change 26 Residential Zone Intensification. We have Peter Skilton and Wendy out embling, and the Wendy's again. Oh, the joke's been had, hasn't it? The Peter Pan joke. So anyway, I'll pass the speaking paddle over to you, Peter and Wendy, and obviously we have Wendy embling in the room also. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This report is possibly one of the most complicated recommendation sections I have seen. So I'm going to take the report as read and just kind of run through the recommendations in a bit of, not the detail of the recommendations, but how it all works, and then we'll be open to questions. So this report has our recommendations numerically, as your normal template is. They were supposed to be, alphabetized. They were supposed to be numerical to try and make a difference between what the independent hearing panel had. It was changed after the fact, so apologies, it's going to be slightly more complicated. So we have recommendations A to K. Therefore, recommendation D has an error in it that I'd like to table. It makes reference to recommendation 6 below. That should read F. We then have appendices A to E. The independent hearing report, which we make reference to in our recommendations, are recommendations A to O, and appendices are numerical. So we tried to make it clear, and then we got a bit confused ourselves, so apologies. So our appendices, A is the full independent hearing panel's report, which we make reference to. B is the list of their recommendations A to O with what we have suggested as recommendations, and in this case, they are all to accept. C is the map changes. D is the templated report that will go through to the minister with our rejections and alternatives. And then E is the appendice of minor errors which we wish to accept. So we make reference of these throughout the recommendation. So we'll keep going. So we'll start easy with all the accepts. So we have accepted or recommended to accept the independent hearing panel's A to O specific recommendations. We have said to accept the following non-specific recommendations. The next one is more accepting of the non-specifics where we don't specifically reject. So it's tabled out further within our table 2 and in the following the recommendation F, which we will say some recommendations for rejecting. So this is where we get a bit complicated. And this is where I was supposed to be trying to make it clearer by explaining. I don't think I am, so bear with me again. The next one is all the
Can I just
maps.
interrupt a little bit there? Hold on, everybody. It can be Is this making sense to anybody here in terms of A's, O's, F's and paragraphs and appendices?
No.
No. So can I invite you to perhaps start at the top again and go a little bit slower so we can actually
Absolutely.
carry with you? Because I appreciate that you guys know this like the back of your hand.
Yeah.
But we're slightly less familiar with the material. So can I invite you to just to start again and we'll make sure we're actually going along with you. Okay, is that cool?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks, Wendy.
I knew this would be a problem and I hadn't thought of a way to come up with it easier. But we'll start with, so the independent hearing panel made specific and non-specific recommendations. The specific being A to O, we have suggested they be accepted. Our recommendations C to D talk about accepting the non-specific recommendations. The difference being a second point, those sections aren't all within those recommendations on section 2A, medium density zone, and section 15, infrastructure hazards development and subdivision zone. So the parts recommended within those sections of the district plan, they mostly accept unless we specify later. We accept all the mapping recommendations. Yep.
Claire.
Well, except that we don't accept some of those infrastructure constraints for Cambridge.
Correct.
Yeah, so Cambridge is missing from the list. So when you say we accept all of the mapping, yeah, so there was I just want to say except for Cambridge.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
So all except Cambridge.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Correct.
And so then we then start on our rejections. And that's where we have the 4 specific key rejections. And this is within Appendix D. So the 4, or maybe I'll just mention them specifically. So that's the infrastructure constraint, qualifying matter overlay removal around the Cambridge town centre. So that's what you're referring to, Claire. The rule about the site coverage for stormwater qualifying matter overlay. The deletion of relocated building provisions and rejecting also the financial contributions. So there are the 4 key rejections that we spoke about that are then detailed in Appendix D. We then explain that the reasons we've used to reject those recommendations, we detail them. We ask that part of Appendix D that it be approved to be sent, which includes the alternatives where necessary. That we are authorised to share that Appendix D with the minister. That we accept all the minor errors put forward and identified in Appendix E. And ask also for delegation for myself to correct any other minor errors, which we hopefully won't find any more, but if, as we're going, we write up our public notice, if we pick up on anything else minor and trivial, that could be corrected. Did I do a better job of it?
That was heaps better. Yeah, I got more of that. Yeah, no, like that was great. Yeah. It's a very complicated set of recommendations. You're not far wrong there. So do you want to open the floor for questions, or are you going to carry us through your
Just-
report,
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I'll just make one more comment, and I guess it's just to specify that we needed these recommendations to be this level of complexity so that from a planning perspective, we could look back in time to know exactly what was decided in very specific detail. But I do appreciate your patience because these are not the normal recommendations we would put forward, but it's needed from a planning perspective. So I will open up for questions. I won't go into any further detail.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Wendy. Look, I'll open the floor for questions. Claire?
Yeah, thank you. I just think you guys are absolute heroes for getting this to us. Congratulations. I don't admit to understanding it completely, but I appreciate all of the work that's gone into this. I mean, I'm not particularly comfortable with approving the plan change because I do have some fundamental objections to some of the intensification proposals. However, I just wanted to clarify about the map that is on page 348 of our diligent report, and it's the stormwater constraint qualifying matter overlay for Te Awamutu. There isn't a legend provided, and there's two different shades of green. And I could not work out, I think it should show the reason for the different shades of green, if there's a particular change, why they are. those different
It
shades.
should be the same shade of green. If it is shaded green, it is within
Oh, okay.
the overlay. What's possibly happened is that and during the mapping exercise, one property might have been covered twice
Oh, I see.
to give it a darker shade.
Oh, okay, right.
But ultimately, if it's green, it's in. If
Okay.
it's not
Right.
green, it's out.
Yeah, and you don't want to make, jump to conclusions about why it might be darker green. Okay, no, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Claire. Roger and
Yes,
then Lou.
thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this report and I appreciate the difficulty that you've had in putting it together. But I also understand that this format that you've presented it to us, really the format has been determined by what would be required by the minister in terms of looking at our objections or non-objections to the various parts of the plan change. I also believe that we had some very good discussion in a manner that we could understand on the components of this, that from what I can see, you've correctly carried forward the councillors' requests and opinions in terms of the interpretation. And you've just presented them from what I can see. I can't have 100% because it is in a totally different way. But I think from what I see, I'm happy to accept that you've reflected council opinion in this instruction and response to the minister. So I'm happy to accept that
If I
without
can-
having 100% confidence that I'm happy to accept that you have.
And if I can perhaps explain things a little bit more, the reasoning for that. So the Appendix D is a template that the Ministry for the Environment has given us to say this, if you are going to be rejecting anything to the minister, this is the format that it must be in.
Yep.
And so that is what we have followed and the reason for it.
Sorry, Lou.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just looking at this. I certainly agree with what Councillor Gordon just said. It is a very complex issue, and we've been dragged into this as a Tier 1 council, which I still disagree with radically, but still, that's my personal opinion. The couple of issues that I just wanted to raise, things that we're talking of exemptions, and one of them is the overlay or the stormwater constraint qualifying matter of the 40%. That means that we must have a certain area of permeable surface for stormwater for these. We're saying that we need to do that. And the second question, which I've still got to get, is insufficient evidence to support the removal of the relocated building. And I just wanted to sort of get some idea of what you actually meant there. I tried to read it in the background information, but honestly, I got a little bit lost, sorry.
Sure. I'll start with the stormwater overlay. Yeah, so if a site is within the stormwater overlay, the development control that applies to that is a 40% site coverage as opposed to a 50% site coverage
yeah.
elsewhere. The exemption that was recommended by the hearings panel was to say that if as part of a subdivision, somebody presented a stormwater design that was accounting for 50% site coverage of buildings, and that was approved, then the resulting development could be 50%. It meant that it ended up being very complicated.
I know what you're saying, but it lost me completely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With the relocated building ones, it was something that was brought up through Kāinga Ora submissions. There wasn't a lot of detail provided as to why they were saying that they thought the relocated building provisions should be deleted, other than to say that it was adequately, they believed it was adequately catered for under the Building Act provisions. As part of the rebuttal evidence that was presented to the hearings committee, that was agreed with, but it wasn't expanded on. Okay. Our view of it at this point in time is that the Building Act itself does not provide sufficient coverage to enable us to consider the effects of relocated buildings, and therefore the district plan should have its own provisions related to them.
Because that would cover an issue where you had somebody take a building off a site, but locate it somewhere within our commercial or our area and store it there. Would that, because that would be an issue, wouldn't it?
It can be an issue where a building gets relocated onto a site, somebody runs out of money to do it up or whatever, or they're not aware of what the actual costs of having to reinstate that building are. So the provisions give us the ability to undertake enforcement or abatement notices in that situation to address it. But it also means that somebody who's looking to relocate a dwelling has to get a report which will inform them of the actual structural integrity of that building and and how much it's likely to cost to bring it up to scratch. So it provides a good fallback for people.
Liz.
Yeah, thank you both. Look, I guess from my perspective, this has been a really long journey. And we've heard from our communities time and time again that this doesn't really feel like something that we're ready for as Waipa. I said to Wayne last week, look, is there an opportunity to explain this to the minister, but there is no opportunity. Wendy, you've come back and said, look, we can't march up to Wellington because Susan and I and Mike Pettit are going to be in Wellington this week. Thought we might be able to do something a bit unique, a little bit special, but I believe that option is not available to us. So for me, this still just doesn't sit right. So what are our options at this point in time? So I would really like to see our two MPs come and sit around this table and help us explain to our communities what the future could look like, because they've been largely absent as far as I can see. Their voice, I haven't heard their voice out there in the communities trying to explain, and this is going to largely be left to us. That's what I can see. I want our communities to know that we have fought as hard as we can, used every opportunity, every lever that is available to us. But at the end of the day, this is a central government, piece of work that has been landed on us as a Growth Council. So can we please invite our two lovely MPs around this table in the near future to have a bit of please explain to us how we're going to, provide the detail to our communities. We won't see results overnight or changes overnight, but they're coming. And I think we need to prepare them for that.
Yeah, I'll add To that through the chair, obviously you referenced the fact that I spoke to Ministry for Environment staff about your request, so I put that to them. And they said that the legal requirements for this process, this intensified streamlined process, is that the minister can only consider what you yourselves have been able to consider in terms of the submissions and the process that the hearing and the independent hearing panel went through. So they felt that the presentation of these recommendations, the rejections, would add alternative material to them, and they were worried about the legality of that. So that's the reason that offer was rejected. I definitely think that we can invite the ministers along to have that discussion. In terms of next steps, I will say, obviously the ministers have kind of did their press release on what's next for optionality for MDRS, and they still would need to draft the legislation and put forward that legislation. But what they've intended at the moment is that we would mid next year have legislation that allows us to put forward a vote for yourselves to ratify if you want to keep MDRS or reject it. If you choose to reject it, then that would, well, either way, then we would have to do a new plan change, because they've got a raft of other exciting things that will be thrust upon us, but like PC26. So that if we chose to ratify, say, no, we don't want MDRS, then that would be the next plan change to remove those elements. That's where we're hoping the district plan review will be able to encapsulate that and not need a standalone expensive plan change. But yes, we can certainly bring along the ministers, because I think that's our clear messaging through our media releases has been, we don't want this, this has been thrust upon it, but to have the MPs add to that would, I think, yeah. Cool.
Yeah. To your comments there around the legalities, that was some of the conversation I'd had with Minister Bishop when I was in Wellington around the infrastructure conference. So yeah, he said he had huge sympathy for us, but that they were legally bound to undertake the course of action that they took. Not much sympathy, not cold comfort for us, I guess, here, although, you know. Andrew.
This is not really, I mean, this is something that's been thrust upon us, and it has required a colossal amount of work. For what is, well, I mean, people will agree, but not a lot of change out of all of that to our district, in my view. Liz is probably right. We probably will see, you know, development happen. This has come from. But my question is, this has been a colossal amount of work. Is it all going to be down the toilet, or will actually some of it be useful when it comes to our district plan review?
That's a really good question. So I think we need to be clear that this plan change encapsulated the policy requirements for under the MPS urban development, I forget what UD stands for, as well as medium density residential standards. So it was both those elements, and the built form that came from MDRS is what we, and therefore you, don't like. And so certainly if we did the next plan change with district plan review to remove some of those elements, it's not changing everything.
If I can add to that a little bit, I think that there will be parts of it that give us really good information and be able to be reused moving forward, particularly the mapping work that's been done for the infrastructure constraints, for us being able to get a good handle on what our systems can or can't handle, and identifying into the future areas where more intense development is appropriately located. So I think that will prove beneficial moving forward.
Some relief to me, thank you.
Yeah, good question, Andrew. Any other questions for these smart two people? No? Hey, I guess I just sort of wanted to kind of draw this discussion to a close just by sort of saying that as much as we don't like the mandated nature of it, we don't like the crudeness of it, I think we can't lose sight of the intention. And I don't mean to sound like a bit of a Pollyanna here, but the reality is that the intention behind this is crude and is clumsy, and in some places not going to pan out well for potentially. The intention is to increase housing options and therefore affordability. And I guess I don't really want to lose sight of that because quite frankly, I quite like my kids to be able to afford to buy a house and my grandchildren. So I guess that's the prize, right? It's more about how we go about doing that and the fact that we've been forced to do something we don't think quite fits here. So although I have a real ick feeling about this, there's part of me thinks, at the end of the day, we've got to crack a few eggs to make an omelette. And frankly, the affordability issues in our district are horrific. So yeah, it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. Roger.
Could I just add to that debate? Because I agree wholeheartedly. I agree with Lou. And this discussion has become more of a political discussion as to whether it was a correct move or not, rather than the integrity of this document that we've actually seen. But I do agree with you that, this is an initiative that has been put in place, but it's not the only one, because even if you look at our regional planning documents and future-proof have also indicated that we need to have on our greenfield developments a far greater density than we've got now. So this requirement is not in isolation, if you like. It's coming at us from many different angles, regionally and nationally.
Absolutely. And we just can't keep gobbling up greenfield. It's as simple as that.
I think the big problem with this is this piece of legislation came out in a very different environment to what we're living in today. It was an environment where we were going forward. We're now facing a recessive mode, and a lot of our constraints as council have come apparent to us in this period of time. And we are facing quite severe restrictions on council expenditure. And this has actually come along and said that we're going to have to pay for all of that along the way. I really sympathise with staff because you've worked so hard to put this up, and the reality of life is things have changed quite perceptibly. There's a lot of places, houses are not selling every 2 weeks now. They're taking up to 6 months. Things are changing quite a lot. So, yeah, it makes a difference.
They are changing, but they will swing back.
I don't disagree with it coming back, but I'm just saying at the current point, we're facing severe economic constraints. I better push my button.
Thanks, Lou. Any other discussion on this very complex and highly technical recommendation which we've been walked through? Now, I understand there are some changes afoot and that may take some minutes to get them finalised to be able to share them on the screen. So how about we just take a few minutes break for them to be pulled together. I think Wendy will. Okay. I think we are back now and staff have cleverly incorporated the changes that were necessary that were canvassed at the beginning of the meeting, and those changes to those recommendations are appearing on the screen. So Wendy, can I ask you to go through them for us?
Absolutely. So the first one you can see there within recommendation D is what I mentioned right at the start, where our numbers, alphabets all got a bit around the wrong way. So recommendation 6 referenced initially is recommendation F. So that one's the easy one. We then, following Claire's comments about infrastructure constraint qualifying matter overlay for Cambridge, we realised that we should make it stronger to explain what we mean within this recommendation, but be reassured that it was within the rejection and alternative Appendix D, but we need to add this map back in here. So this is the infrastructure constraint for Cambridge, the overlay, because we realise without this, it might not be clear that we want this overlay within all of Cambridge. It's just where we are not wanting to remove it for the area around the CBD of Cambridge. But we didn't want this to look like we weren't having it anywhere in Cambridge. That's then meant some renumbering of the rest of that list. So this is the overlay applies to all of Cambridge, and we have this separately rejected the bit around the CBD. So it's addressed the way we've discussed. Within recommendation F, we just found an extra word while we were looking in great detail at things. So removal of the infrastructure constraint qualifying matter overlay removal around the Cambridge town centres. We've just removed removal. And that is it. That makes sense.
Can you just go back up to the renumbering? I think some of the numbers might be
Oh,
wonky, or is it me and my really poor?
No, it could be you. No, it could be me, sorry.
It should be IV. The IVI?
Oh, yes.
What's this one supposed to look? That one.
Yeah, good spotting.
I'm no Roman numerals expert, but I'm not sure that that looks right. But I know, or is
No.
it?
No, you're
IV.
absolutely right.
Cool, excellent.
Thank you.
No, that doesn't look right. That's VI.
That should be IV.
That's right. George, do you want to change it?
Oh, okay.
IV, please. It should have been automated and it would have been much easier, but never mind.
The joys of track changes, okay? Clear.
Yeah, just the wording on the removal of the Cambridge infrastructure constraint. Wouldn't it be better to state reinstate where it was recommended to be removed or something? Because at the moment it's actually confusing. It's the next section down. Yeah, rejects. Yeah. Oh, okay. So it is terminology of relating to. Yeah. Okay. Could you say the specific removal or something? You know, like because it just sounds like in the top, the preceding recommendation we are accepting that, and then we're saying we're actually removing it. So we just so we just disagreeing with the specific removal of parts. Yeah.
So I think, so it's worded specifically in this way because these were the wordings of the recommendations from the independent hearing panel. So for example, if we look at the last one, proposed amendments to section 18 about financial contributions. So we're rejecting them. So, and the same with deletion of provisions relating to relocated buildings. Our recommendation is actually the opposite. We want them to remain. So they're just, it's to be clear about what the panel was suggesting, and then the text above says we are rejecting these.
Happy with that, Claire? Yep. Cool. Right. So there we have it. Our amended recommendations on the screen there. Do I have anybody who's happy? I will reluctantly move that from the chair. And is anybody going to second that for me? Philip will second that. Why not, he says. So I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Look, thank you, team. It has not been an easy journey, and nor is it over yet. But yeah, it just gets murkier and murkier, doesn't it? You know. So look, well done on retaining not only a good sense of humour but the clarity in your thinking. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks very much. And thank you, Wendy, for your assistance too. Right, so that formally brings our meeting to a conclusion. We have a handful of workshops, but Dale Marie, could I impose on you for a closing karakia for us, please?
Tēnā tātou i te whare, inuhia ki te uru tapunui, kia wātea, kia māma, tēnā kau te tinana, te wairua. Koiara ka whakairia ki runga, kia tīna, haumie, huie, tae ki. Tēnā tātou.
All right, ka pai. Thank you so much. Right, look, you know what? We're a minute before our indicative timings. Look at us go. But let's kick off with our open workshop called Waikato Water Done Well, and I will see if staff can, we're ready now, Sharon. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou.
Yeah, if you could introduce the item, Dawn, that would be much appreciated. Welcome, gentlemen. Nice to see you both.
Lovely, thank you. And almost not needing an introduction, but welcome to Don McLeod, Chief Executive of Matamata Piako District Council, and Vaughan Payne from CoLab in terms of, on behalf of the piece of work that we all getting our heads around, I guess, is the Waikato Water Done Well, which is an initiative that has come from the Mayors and Chairs Forum, and CoLab are supporting in terms of the progress of the report. So today here also in support of the item, we have Calvin French, Chief Executive from CoLab, and Jeanette Terrell, who is supporting the project from a comms and engagement perspective. But I'll hand over to these esteemed gentlemen for this item. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Mayor Susan and councillors, for the courtesy of allowing us to come in front of you. It really is much appreciated, and I know you've got a lot of topics to talk about, and Three Waters is that story that seems to never end up giving, and so we continue. And just to remind ourselves about where this has come from, you all know that the previous government withdrew its proposed Three Waters plan, and the new government decided it wished to introduce a new policy frame. And 6 months ago, the mayoral iwi leaders forum asked the chief executives of the Waikato to give consideration as to what models might, or issues might be best or should be considered and looked at as far as the Local Waters Done Well proposal is concerned. Now, just to emphasise, we're not here to preach to you or tell you what to do, obviously. That's your decision. We're here hopefully to provide some commentary and some issues that you might like to reflect on as you go down the journey of deciding which way you want to go. And I remember when that decision was made by the Leaders Forum, the question was asked, I asked the question, do we know how much is budgeted in the Waikato for the next 10 years in terms of Three Waters infrastructure? And I didn't know, and nor did anyone know. And as it turned out, that figure from the latest LTPs is about 5 billion over the next 10 years. And we knew and know and have talked to the construction industry and understand that they simply don't have the ability to deliver that volume of work in that time frame. So we're starting from a base of knowing across the Waikato that the ability to deliver that level of work is constrained by the resources available. Now, what happens in a supply and demand situation for that, of course, inevitably, prices go up. Now, is that a problem per se? Well, is it a problem for those councils who perhaps have committed to capital work now? Potentially, because as we know, depreciation and liability has to be reassessed every 3 years. And if prices go up, so does the replacement cost of infrastructure. And you know as much as I know how difficult it is to explain to ratepayers that their costs are going up, but they're not getting anything more for it, simply a bigger depreciation pool. Anyway, that particular matter of capital work delivery gave us cause to reflect on what we could do to establish a more strategic approach to some of the challenges of delivering that volume of work. And if we operate on our own, it's our view that that is more challenging to take, to align ourselves, for example, to the construction industry and establish strategic capital work delivery in conjunction and aligned to how they are able to provide. We know also that there is the potential, if we look at consenting, and we'll talk more of it in the presentation, that by aggregating we can influence regulators more readily than we can influence them now. And is there a possibility that moving away from considering point discharge by point discharge and move to a catchment-based approach, which is practical when you aggregate, provide a more practical or rational view of discharge standards if we look at it from a catchment-based as opposed to a point discharge base. We also know that the regulators will determine, if we don't have influence, to determine things on our behalf, and the ability for councils at individual level to influence that is limited. But we believe that there's an opportunity to be given consideration in terms of speaking with the regulators if we take the opportunity to aggregate. But I won't go into it any more than that. Vaughan will give some facts and figures and some examples, and then perhaps me or Susan, if we've got time, we can open it up for questions. Thank you very much.
May I just ask, just before we go, you say, well, the influence was there to leave the questions until the end.
Look, Mayor Susan, it's however you wish to run it.
I'm happy if the presenters are happy for questions to come at the time that seems most fitting for the discussion, but I don't want to derail you if you've got to run on, if you like.
No, fair enough.
So if it's appropriately inserted at that time, then by all means wave your hand so long as you're comfortable with that, Vaughan. Fabulous, thank you.
Tuatahi mihi ana ki a koe, te koromatua Susan, te koromatua Tuarua Liz, o te rā ki a koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Can I just check our timing and how much time we have? And also whether there's a presentation that's that we've...
12:05 technically, but I mean, I'm quite comfortable to be a little bit elastic with that, given the importance of the subject matter.
So I'll try and whiz through. Is there a presentation that's...
It has been circulated. We do have this one before us. Yeah.
Great. So you can acknowledge the work of the joint forum that Don mentioned of the mayors and iwi chairs and guiding the work that we've done, and in particular also the chief executives, and can acknowledge Gary Diet, obviously, who was influential in coming up with these recommendations, in addition to Dawn and her team, where we've tried to come up with an approach where hopefully every council can see themselves in this pathway that we're recommending, noting that there's quite diverse needs across the Waikato region, and we're recommending an incremental approach that's, I suppose, a lot safer than what we saw from the previous government. So I won't spend too much. This is the format of our presentation. Look at what's going on nationally, the Waikato context, some key findings, recommendations and next steps, and I'll try and focus on the key points, if you like. Nationally, I understand that you're well across the changes that are proposed. Suffice to say, there's increasing regulation coming our way, not just in terms of what we're used to, but in terms of also economic regulation, and at the same time, a strong requirement around demonstrating financial sustainability. I won't go through the stages. Water services delivery plans, simply to say those are due this time next year. Two main limbs to those plans. The asset management side of those plans, but secondly, what is the delivery model that each council wants to use for those plans. I'll skip through these. I think service delivery models, there's in-house, there's a single council-owned CCO, there's a multi-council owned CCO, a couple of options around community trusts, which we don't think are pragmatic if councils still want to borrow through LGFA, and then as a catch-all, any other model that might meet government requirements. I'll skip through this. So Waikato context, as Don outlined, we have the joint forum made up of iwi chairs and council mayors, not a decision-making forum, but what we regard as a leadership forum that's there to support each council make informed decisions on the merits or otherwise of aggregation. And as therefore Don said, this is really over to you on what suits Waipa, but we do have some recommendations. Key findings, we know the Waikato is diverse. At the same time, there's a strong willingness amongst all the councils to work together. We asked each chief executive, what's the problem from your perspective? And so we have the councils down the left-hand side of this screen and the challenges across the top. And you can see from perhaps a mix of Gary and Dawn's perspective, that the two main challenges for Waipa are related to debt capacity and affordability.
Oh, that's good that you made that clarification.
Roger, can you speak
Sorry,
on? Roger?
it's good that you made that clarification, because my first question was the interpretation of this and what did the ticks mean?
Oh,
And you're telling us that the tick means that we have a problem, not that there is no problem.
No, yeah,
The tick means there is a problem.
Yes.
Yes, good. Thank you for that.
Okay. And I know that you're still working through what that might look like in terms of your borrowing capacity for the next 10 years through your LTP discussions. But suffice to say that bringing Three Waters debt back onto the council books compared to what was previously proposed by the previous government is challenging council's debt capacity. Capital Works, there's $7.5 billion that all councils across the Waikato will be spending on water over the next 10 years. Of that $7.5 billion, $5 billion relates to Capital Works, meeting growth needs and so on. If we look at our overall asset condition, our wastewater network's not too flash across the region, only 44% is rated average or better, and we lose around 11 Olympic-sized pools per day of water that's treated. And we want to acknowledge that in terms of Capital Works delivery, Waipa District Council does a pretty good job. So I just want to put that on the table. Nonetheless, there are still challenges and opportunities. This is the region's view around Capital Works for the next 10 years. So the light or the yellow line at the top is population growth. The grey line is what level of investment staff considered was necessary over the next 10 years. And then the other blue and red lines are what was sitting in the LTPs. So the light blue was 21 LTPs, and then the dark and red line is what was in the draft LTPs in March, and then where councils collectively landed is the dark blue line in June, July. So you can see that while population growth is increasing generally, the investment in capital works is declining. So there's a bit of a mismatch going on. And again, this is a collective view, so this is, the next slide shows the Waipa view.
May I ask just for a clarification on that? When you talk about the LTP 24, for our figures, you're talking about the enhanced annual plan.
Yes.
That was actually a reflection of the previous LTP.
Yes.
In terms of its future.
Yes, and acknowledging that this will probably change again, given the LTP discussions you're still having.
Thank you.
Yep. And so this graph here shows Waipa's capital works as we understand them. The colours mean the same things. So grey is what staff view. The big peak at the end in the grey line related, I think, to renewal work that was proposed at the end of the 10 years. And I think probably the main point here is there's the fluctuations and the lack of certainty, I suppose, that this offers to the supply chain, and therefore if we can work together as a region and smooth out those peaks and troughs, we can probably help the supply chain resource up and maintain those resources and get better pricing is the idea.
Andrew.
Yeah, Vaughan, so Waipa and the whole region are quite front heavy.
Yes.
And I mean, that could be construed as being quite reasonable. Infrastructure tends to go in steps rather than a smooth line. But it is suggesting that we as a region have got an awful lot to try and get done in a very short space of time, and then, you know, and that constitutes a problem in terms of delivery, I guess.
Yes, yes, and generally, and this is a generalisation, long-term plans typically front load for the first 3 years, and then they're reviewed after 3 years and they front load again for the first 3 years. So that's the general pattern we see. Any comments, Don?
No, yes, I think most people tend to front load their first 3 years because projecting out beyond that gets a little awkward. I'll use our example. I think for Matamata, we had provided in the previous LTP for 12 million for an upgrade. We're now at 42 million. That's brought about by various factors, of course, but the reality is forecasting is always troubled by assumption.
We've also acknowledged the second main challenge of Waipa, which is a challenge for a number of councils around affordability. So what we've done is we've looked at the average water rates currently and what they're anticipated to be by year 10, and then looked at where those average water rates are more than 2% of your average household income, then there's an affordability challenge. So with that 2% threshold of household income, currently we have 2 councils, Thames, Coromandel and Waitomo, with affordability challenges, and that increases to 5 councils at the end of the 10 years. But also note that if we're not investing sufficiently in our long-term plans, because we're just front-loading them for the first 3 years and then dropping off investment, this picture could be a bit worse than what we think. Secondly, we've used average household income across the whole district as opposed to just those houses that are connected with the service. So it's more about indicative figures as opposed to black and white figures.
Roger.
Could I just make or ask a question there in terms of 2034 affordability? And you've identified that Waipa, in fact, is not too bad, 1.7 and 1.8. But if there was a future model, is there an inference from this table that if you were to address the affordability in those areas that are in fact red banded on that column, then equaling out that kind of cost on rates and affordability, then that would make quite a considerable change to the others that are green, because you'd be putting more of a loading on them and therefore changing the affordability within those authorities.
Yeah, in the recommendations that we've got, we're not proposing in the short term to have what we call cross-subsidisation between districts. We're proposing that in the short term, money coming out of a district gets spent in that district, mainly because not all councils have invested equally. Yeah. I won't spend too much time on this, except mainly because these aren't big challenges to Waipa in the interest of time. Just to note that Waikato District Council is unique in that they have a contract with Watercare that expires in 2026, and they need to find a solution or an alternative model to Watercare by mid-2026. So that's sort of driving the timeframes for the region. Financial findings are that not every council needs a CCO at this time, but we believe that there are benefits for all councils of a CCO. Our modelling shows that when you create scale, that you can do more with less. However, it is really difficult to compare what we call kina with kina or apples with apples, because people collect rates differently. Some councils have differentials for commercial, industrial more than others. And so when you try and compare household rates under a standalone versus aggregated, it becomes really challenging. So we've largely adopted an efficiency target, which we'll explain in a minute. And so if we look at what would and we've got 4 different spatial options: the whole of the Waikato region, the Waikato River catchment, which is the 7 councils from Taupō through to Waikato District Council. That's the Waikato River catchment. The Hauraki Coromandel being Matamata Piako, Hauraki and Thames Coromandel councils. And then the whole of the region excluding Hamilton at their request. So those, if we assume a spend of $100 million to, if you like, spend to save, investing in technologies, those sorts of things, and we assume an efficiency target of 1% per annum, at the end of 10 years, we end up with these sorts of efficiency savings. Now, 1% per annum we think is very conservative. If you think about, and you may have heard about Scottish Water under the previous government's model, they assumed 2% per annum. The Watercare Board has an efficiency target of 4% per annum. And the previous modelling done by Waipa, Waikato and Hamilton City assumed an efficiency target of 4 to 5% per annum. So we think 1%'s conservative. We don't want to overstate the benefits, but there are benefits to be found through scale. And this is both CapEx and OpEx on the slide.
Claire?
Yeah, Vaughan, just on this point, I'd really love to see some empirical evidence that supports the assumptions. Like I've got a business background, I like the detail, and I am conscious that, there were criticisms about using Scottish Water and also Watercare as a comparison for the Waikato, which actually has lots of smaller councils, discrete networks that are not likely to be amalgamated into one. Like the Castalia reports that were done by LGNZ in 2022. They highlighted the need to be very clear where your savings are going to be. So you said you've got some modelling. I'm really hoping that's based on empirical evidence. Like if I look at, there's been some really good reports coming out of Wellington Water, which is 10 councils working together for a managed CCO, like it's not asset ownership has been changed over, but they had a 62% increase in their OpEx over the last 3 years. And it says to me that that caution that the Castalia report said, that you've got to make sure that you're not just assuming because you're amalgamating, you're going to get efficiencies. They actually recommend you use real life examples of amalgamations. They suggest Tasmania, and do data envelope analysis, which is looking for that efficiency frontier. So where your savings are going to be. Because I'm aware that the Waikato Water study that was done by Cranley, it did highlight quite significant savings, but they were just forecast savings. Most of them for Waipa was around a sub-regional wastewater treatment plant based on the CapEx, okay? When the detailed business case was done, that included OpEx, suddenly it was $84 million more than a standalone. So I'm really cautious. I appreciate we are asked to make sure that we're going to do local water well, and we want to create an entity that's going to deliver savings for our ratepayers if at all possible. But I don't want to go into something that we're going to end up actually, it'd be embarrassing to see something like Wellington Water where the costs are pretty much exploding and the controls that individual councils have are very limited. Yeah, so I'm really cautious. I want to see the detail. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire. Just one comment before I hand over to Don. So Waikato District Council, which is a management service with Watercare, say 10% in their first year. At the same time, as you would expect, when you start getting under the bonnet and looking at the real investment needs, they've had to spend more. But you asked Waikato District about the benefits, they'll say, well, we would have had to spend even more than we did if we didn't have that arrangement with Watercare. But I get the point about the need for empirical evidence.
And I have already put a request through that our council does get the benefit of hearing from Waikato District's experience with Watercare, because I think we'd learn a lot from it. Yeah,
sure.
so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and look, acknowledge that like all modelling, and LTPs are a model and a projection. They're always wrong. It's just how wrong they are. I suppose if you were to take some superficial appreciation of understanding of what could be achieved through aggregation, and Waipa have been through this debate more than any other councils in the Waikato, and I respect that. But I can recall, and Dawn might recall the instance where we tried to get similar engineering standards across the region for tanker entrances, for goodness sakes. It took us 2 or 3 years to get agreement on that. Those sorts of practices, if you like, and we've got common development standards now, but those practices around bespoke design of pump stations, bespoke design of access points, the different training standards which people apply, the different skills that people, we don't have a coordinated training framework let alone at a regional level, at a national level. All those sorts of things are possible if you do it through some sort of aggregated mechanism. And so, I mean, it's anecdotal, but it's, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful. I mean, if you were to manage infrastructure, expensive, complicated, and risky infrastructure, risky in compliance, and if you're to do that, if you're to argue that 67 local authorities do that well, then you could argue, why isn't other infrastructure managed on that basis as well?
And so that was both CapEx and OpEx, the previous slide, in terms of efficiency savings. So if we apply the same assumptions of 1% per annum and the same geographic areas, then in terms of capital works, these are the projected savings of 1% per annum also. I'm conscious of time, Mayor Susan, so I'll just keep working through. Smart consenting is about recognising that we have multiple councils and consents in a river catchment. Currently, consents are obtained and renewed on a plant-by-plant basis, as opposed to looking at the whole of the catchment, the total contaminant load, looking at the scheduling of consents and going from a compliance strategy point of view, what makes sense in terms of investing in the improving water quality of the river. There's one example here of Matamata Piako looking at its 5 wastewater treatment plants in the same catchment. Rather than processing those individually, they process them together. The nutrient balancing between the wastewater treatment plants, nitrogen, phosphorus, those sorts of things, saved $4 million in processing costs, and estimate that they will, subject to how the
Regional council view it, yeah.
how the consent finally lands, could be a saving of around $20 million in capital work. So if that's one council just within itself, looking at smarter consenting, what's the opportunity between multiple councils and consents?
And
Claire.
So I'm quite intrigued by this, yeah, and I think it's an admirable goal, yeah, I think it's a great idea. My question to you though is, do we need to have an aggregated regional CCO to actually start doing this? You know, because I could argue we should be having a pretty serious conversation with the regional council saying this is the way we want to go, you know, because I struggle to see why we'd actually need to have the structure of a regionally CCO to actually do it.
Yeah, so legally you're right that you don't need an aggregated entity to achieve this. But practically from a consent authority's point of view, and I've got a regional council background, you want to make sure that the commitments that parties have made through a consent process can be affected. And it's really hard if you've got multiple parties with different consents that are subject to LTP planning and investment decisions individually to go, yeah, we're still committed to this. And so the idea would be you have a compliance strategy, a single capital works program, and the funding being driven by one organisation to make sure that there's follow through in terms of those commitments.
And besides that, another potential benefit is to, even if we were to not achieve the level of outcome that we believe might be possible by looking at a catchment level as opposed to a point discharge level, what is possible is that we could take that 10-year work and with the approval of the regulator, so let's make that 15 years. And it aligns better with the civil contracting industry and it takes the pressure off and allows the industry to adapt to the demand. Aggregation also offers the opportunity to sit down with the industry and negotiate a strategic approach to procurement and all those things which are self-evident when you think about it.
The last area of findings is what we call showstoppers or local concerns. So this recognises that even if you had a sound business case being brought to Waipa District Council, you've got local concerns that are over and above financial. And we've given examples on the slide about what's your influence on any aggregated model. What about local needs? How will they be prioritised over, say, Hamilton City or another council? What about the treaty settlement obligations that you have as part of your JMA? We want to make sure that those are delivered on as well. And what about asset ownership? And so we've spent a lot of time working through and identifying what those local concerns are, admittedly at a CE level. And this is the first opportunity we've had to test it wider. But we believe that every local concern becomes something that we've got to design for in building in or coming up with any new organisation. These local concerns are all manageable if we've got the right leadership and ability to compromise. Because at the same time, while we've got local concerns, we also have financial requirements, and you could have lots of local influence, but if there's a financial requirement about having a professional board in place that's competency based, you may not meet this requirement. So it's all about balancing is what we're saying.
Can I just add one word to those? And you've got local voice and influence. Can I just add accountability to that as well?
Yes.
Because I think that was something that came through in certainly my hearing.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
And could I just ask you about the balancing, competing interests, because that's been on the list, hasn't it? Right, right from the word go. Have you done any specific sort of exploration of how that might work? And so I'm not just talking about balancing like the council's work program where, for instance, Waipa might be committed, to a particular wastewater treatment upgrade by a certain period of time and that. But also with our developers, because like Waipa's had a massive program concerning growth infrastructure, and it's sort of been a bit silent about how that is handled, like if that is part of, those priorities or not. Like, I'm quite interested to understand if you've actually done much detail on how you think that might be able to be achieved.
Not in detail, but the reality, I suppose, the other way of looking at it is that it will still be your company. And if I take the airport as an example, and I don't know what the experience of Waipa is with the airport, but one of the fundamental reasons why I believe that the airport has, in recent years anyway, functioned reasonably well, is the effort that the chair and the chief executive take to communicate to the shareholders. And if I could commend anything to you, there was during the debate on Three Waters, LGNZ gave the opportunity for Tasmanian Water to present their journey to us through Zoom at that time. And Taswater was made up, I think, from memory, John might know some of the detail, of 22 local authorities who came together. And there's a good interview I can circulate to you of the Taswater chief executive, and I'm more than happy to make that available through your staff. The fundamental reason why they've been successful and while they're respected and liked by their ratepayers is because they've been able to communicate with each of their shareholders and achieve the outcomes that the shareholders were wanting to achieve. And the key to it is the relationship.
That's really helpful. Thanks.
Could I just make the comment, like in this local concern space, it's kind of, we can compete or we can cooperate. And what you guys are saying, and I'm totally on board with, is cooperation overall will be far more effective and efficient.
Thank you. So we've come up with design parameters for these local concerns, and there's a lot more detail for every design parameter. And then the red highlights that for every local concern, you're also trying to balance the financial requirements so that the organisation you're creating is going to be financially successful. But it is about balancing, compromising leadership, those sorts of things. We're moving on to the recommendations, but just before then, the opportunity that we have in front of us is developing a financially sustainable model which can better provide the water services infrastructure our communities need, meeting regulatory requirements and those of government and community expectations. And the first recommendation is, what does success look like? What are we trying to achieve together between the councils? So what's our vision, what are the outcomes, and how do we measure success? And the first recommendation, therefore, is that in principle, we agree to that success framework or that strategic framework. So the vision is te mana o te wai, te mana o te tangata, healthy water, healthy people. You won't be able to read that, but the first the first outcome relates to financial sustainability. The second one relates to workforce, including supply chain. The third one relates to customer experience. The one after that is the fourth one is local voice being represented. And the last one is about meeting the expectations of key partners and stakeholders, including those represented in treaty settlements and so on. So those are the outcomes. They probably do need refinement, but we believe that it's a good starting point. And then for every outcome, we've come up with some success measures, and I won't go through those in detail, but I think you've got those in front of you. The second recommendation, this is probably the critical recommendation, and that is that who we call participating councils co-design an aggregated model that's staged by function and governed by a professional board from the outset. Stage one is establishment of an organisation providing functional services, and that the end point is an aggregated, fully regulated water services entity. The functions in stage one is that the CCO stood up to respond to what we call critical needs, but with flexibility to evolve over time. Those functions are capital works delivery, consenting, project planning and design, procurement, asset management and education. A lot of those functions are largely outsourced already, not entirely, but largely outsourced already. Stage one is about driving common processes, achieving efficiency savings, and that would be up to the board to hold management feet to the fire in terms of achieving those efficiency savings, as opposed to it being academic and not delivered, and obviously being accountable to shareholders for that performance. Wellington Water, we've heard criticisms of it. It is similar to this model. The difference is that we want shareholders to agree to what the end point is. So not to be stuck in stage one, that stage one is an incremental approach towards the end game, but at least stage one gets us moving in a safe manner towards that end point. There is a limitation around achieving balance sheet separation, extra borrowing in stage one, but we believe, and you'll see from a slide coming up, that you can still achieve that in stage one.
Claire.
Just on the balance sheet separation, Vaughan, is there there's an expectation that the borrowing rate's probably going to be higher than the council one. Yeah, and have you got any idea of how much more it's likely to be? Yeah, and yeah, like one of my concerns is we actually got some large users. Yeah, and so even though it might only be a few basis points, I don't know, like appreciate, yeah, what it's likely to be, and yeah, consider the impacts of that. Yeah.
I'm not sure if Sinead's online. She's been talking a lot to LGFA around this.
Hello all, thank you. Yes, so in terms of the cost of borrowing at stage one, the borrowing would be directly by council, and therefore it would be at council's existing cost of borrowing.
Thank you.
Yes, I do.
Roger.
Thank you, Mayor Susan. Yeah, I just see the relevance in terms of that last point, that if there is a debt capacity that's a challenge, as it is with us, then the consideration of a local CCO actually still is possible within this concept. And if the transition from an entity which is really focused on capital works to some future time of ownership model, I mean, that could be 5, 6, 10, well, we don't know how many years in future. So if there was a need for some form of balance sheet addressing, then a local CCO could still be very much part of this program and would elect itself as to what time to move in to the regional CCO as a full active member.
Short answer is yes, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. No, that's fine. No,
Question.
no, you've made good statements and just agreeing with you, but we can elaborate on what you've said in a minute. So why have we recommended a staged approach? We believe the previous reforms of a big bang were too complex. We are focusing on functions that are largely already outsourced. And it's giving the chance for a CCO to prove itself. If I'm a CEO of a local council handing all of my water business over to an entity that's unproven, that's a high risk. But I think that therefore the staging approach we think is sound, at the same time having a professional board to ensure that there is good performance being delivered. So stage one is about unlocking scale advantages without operations or assets being transferred. We are creating off-ramps. So it might be that some councils are part of co-designing the entity. They don't need to be part of it on day one and they off-ramp. But given that they've negotiated the entry criteria, then they're able to come back on when it suits them. Don't know how clear this is, but it tries to show all the functions on the left-hand side and what stays with council and what would go to a regional CCO. And so what's proposed to stay with council is asset owner. This is stage one, asset ownership, the determination of prices, borrowing, deciding on what investments occur in a district, being regulated and looking after operations are functions that we believe are important to stay with council. Can I also, and then in terms of the regional CCO, it's proposed that we look after for all the councils across the region, capital works delivery, program management, procurement, consenting, project planning and design, asset management, and that's the strategic planning component of asset management, and education and training. Now, it might be that, as I said before, this is the first time we've had the opportunity to get the wider elected members' views on these ideas. And it might be that there are some participating councils that want some modifications to what's being recommended. But this is all about trying to get feedback and having an inclusive design process going forward. An indicative. Oh,
Can I just
sorry.
interrupt you there, Vaughan? Lou,
Thank you. It's a very interesting concept, and we've looked at some of this in the way past. One of the costs of the CCO is upfront, so it's setting up the entity. Okay, so there is a significant cost for us to move into that. So we've got to forward load that somewhere along the line. I look at your scope of responsibilities with interest, and I see that you would have your regional CCO obviously setting us a charge for their facilities and services, which would be tacked into our regulated, into our decisions on what we're charging, because you'd be doing the capital works, the consenting, etc. And we'd have to know, you know, what that would be, because would that be at a regional level or would it be specific to our CCO?
So the establishment costs are still working through, and we want to share those with each of the chief executives for them to bring to you for your information. In terms of the costs of delivering capital works and doing asset management and so on, are costs that you currently incur. What we're proposing is, due to the efficiency gains, working across the whole region, delivering similar functions, that we should be able to do it cheaper than if you did it on your own. But it, you know, I don't want to make promises, but the idea is that we can deliver it more effectively than, or cost effectively than an individual council could.
Roger.
Yeah, thanks again, through you, Madam Chair. The capital works delivery, will that include capital works that are driven by growth? And hence, who would determine the timing and priority of the allocation of the regional resources into the specific demands of districts that might have high growth demands?
So the idea is that we come up with a combined capital works program, and that therefore the capital works program and the scheduling that you currently have would be put on the table. The idea is that your programming won't change and your delivery won't change, because you're paying for that and you need to receive the service that you're paying for. Similarly with Hamilton, similarly with Matamata Piako. If we need more resources to deliver that, then there's something wrong, that a council's not putting in enough resources to deliver their own program.
So cooperation is required.
Yeah. Getting back to Andrew's point, it's cooperation, not competition.
This is diagrammatically what's proposed. So we have the regional CCO with a professional board, and this is stage one. Shares are held equally by shareholders, noting that asset ownership, money coming from an area gets spent in an area, so there's no need to worry about different shareholding arrangements. And that there's a service agreement between the regional CCO and each shareholder for the service that they're receiving. And this is where the local CCO idea comes in, where if a council needs balance sheet separation and extra borrowing, then that could happen within this model, subject to, again, negotiations and feedback from the CEs. The idea is that you could still share the same board and still share the same management between the local CCO and the regional CCO, and you have to make that clear to the board members when they came on board.
Just a clarification, I'm sure that what you've said, I totally understand, but you're saying all participating councils irrespective of size, will have an equal shareholding.
In stage one. It might change for stage two, which is the fully regulated water entity. And the idea is that the board would come up with an establishment plan to move from stage one to stage two, negotiate that establishment plan with the shareholders, including shareholding arrangements. But we believe it's too early to get into that detail, and we would charge the board to manage that process.
I'm quite supportive of that. So it's
But I
not
think-
the same, it's not the same model as. No.
Just quickly through.
Why are we expecting a credit downgrade?
Yeah, okay.
Sinead? We've got a question, why are we expecting a credit downgrade?
So it's a likely downgrade, and that needs to be reviewed in light of the announcement that came out last week. LGFA since then are quite confident that the cost of borrowing should be able to retain the same. So just take that as a question mark over it rather than anything at this point, as everything gets worked through between LGFA and the clarity around the borrowing mechanisms is made clear.
Thanks, Sinead, and can I acknowledge Sinead's leadership in this project as well?
And can I just seek further clarification of a point that you had possibly a dozen slides before, and that is the fact that a community trust enterprise would not be able to fit into this structure?
I can have a go at that one, Sinead. It's because we believe it's going to be cost effective for councils to continue to borrow through LGFA, and a community trust in the short term wouldn't be an option to borrow through LGFA.
Lou, did you have?
Yeah, just quickly to the chair, recognising that all the shares are going to be held equally. Okay, we're given equal shares. Will there be in the future recognition of the capital input of each council? Because normally with shareholders you have your capital is your input, and you are recognised in the entity in the amount of capital that you've presented to that entity. Just wondering whether that's going to be resolved at some future point in time, because otherwise you have a minuscule council with a very small amount of capital and a large council that has a large amount.
You would certainly expect the board to be working through that issue when it comes up with an establishment plan to move to stage two. And I would, perhaps I'm being glass half full, if we go back to the idea of balancing nutrients between wastewater treatment plants and the investment that Waipa is making in terms of, say, Cambridge, that might help offset some of the other investments from other councils in the same catchment. And therefore, you can think quite broadly around what you're bringing to the table.
Thank you. Sorry, just to clarify.
Monty, then Claire.
Sorry, did I jump in? It's a problem sitting up here. If a particular council needed to do a CCO to access headroom, the expectation would be it would be the same board as the stage one CCO and the same management structure. So kind of a shelf CCO. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. But it's got to be worked through and obviously acceptable to that local council, that it's happy to have the same board and the same management, but all we're saying is it's possible with cooperation.
And do you anticipate that that would be a smoother path to forming a CCO for individual councils?
Yes, and I suppose what we're trying to avoid is doubling up of costs. So if you've got your local CCO with a board and management and a regional CCO with a board and management, is that if you're also receiving services from both, you're doubling up on costs. So we're trying to raise ideas at the moment that enable you to design, or us to design, something that's cost effective.
Claire.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting discussion. I just wanted to highlight, it was earlier in the slides about the professional board, and I got the impression that that was where you're expecting the efficiencies and the design and operation to emanate from. Whereas I'd be really cautious about that approach. And I think my comments earlier about you needed to do the detailed analysis and understand where your savings are likely to be and set targets on that and then compare your performance and things like that, rather than just rely on a professional board to deliver it. So I suppose it's just reiterating that point.
Yeah, sure. And if I pick up your query correctly, I mean, obviously Waipawa have got very competent and professional staff and advise you very well on what is required and when it's required. That might not always be the case. And one of the benefits potentially because at the moment, you're hugely reliant on your chief executive and your staff, and they can change. And a professional board, and I don't mean any disrespect in saying this, brings a knowledge and an expertise to the table that holds the staff's feet to the fire and ensures that what is going to be delivered will be delivered. So that's the concept.
Thanks for those comments. And just as a tiny thing about procurement, something that I'd just like to flag is like at Waipawa, we've got this policy in place where we're trying to support local businesses.
Sure.
And so we've got targets about trying to have local contractors do our work. So I'm just a bit, I can understand where you're coming from, you know, with trying to get region-wide and coordinated procurement, but I don't want our local businesses to miss out either. And I'm not sure how that's going to work.
No, that's a perfectly reasonable point and perfectly reasonable to ask of a company that you will own, partly own. I know, for example, that Auckland Transport, for example, when they have put their work out to tender, have a philosophy at sub-regional level to ensure that there's a certain quantum of local contractors engaged. So those philosophies can be applied in a commercial frame as well.
Just conscious of time. The third recommendation is if each council could consider the recommendation 1, consider recommendation 2, and advise of your position by mid-September. And if you decide not to be a participating council, you would exit the work stream and be kept informed of progress. Those participating councils, the idea is to negotiate a heads of agreement to bring it back to each council for approval in October, and with the idea of it being signed in November. We're driven by Waikato District Council needing to make some calls on its business continuity challenge. The heads of agreement's non-binding, but enables a demonstration of commitment to continue to work together. As you know, there'll be formal documentation that follows in terms of constitutions, letters of expectation, statements of intent, and those would similarly be brought back to council for your adoption. We expect that to be in Q1 next year, and that would, again, that would be where you turn your non-binding agreement into something that's binding. And I'll explain shortly about off-ramps. So the timeframes are resolution, if I've got this right, you've got a meeting on the 27th of August. Come back to you in October to look at the non-binding heads of agreement. If you're happy with that and still want to stay in the tent, to have governance documentation for your adoption in Q1 25, and then Q2 25 to have a board established and an establishment CE in place. And what's the scope of the heads of agreement that we're recommending? So it is identifying what are those key governance documents like the Constitution, shareholders agreement, letters of expectation. It would identify the steps to establish the stage 1 entity, identify roles and how decisions are made at stage 1, a commitment in that heads of agreement to the end game, so we don't stay in stage 1 forever, that we want a fully regulated entity to deliver on that strategic direction we've talked about. It'll identify how we move from stage 1 to stage 2. So that's where, for example, we propose the board be responsible for coming up with an establishment plan. It would also identify exit ramps. So as I said before, a council may decide to exit after the governance documentation's been adopted because you've negotiated or you want to negotiate. You may not see yourself being part of stage 1. You could exit, or, and if you did so, there'd be a process for bringing you back on board at a later date when it suited you, but at least you've been part of the co-design process. And I think, Your Worship, that's our presentation.
Oh, look, thank you very much, Vaughan. Roger.
Thank you. I actually like the progress of what you've presented to us. But let's say we commit to stage 1 and we commit to stage 1 with a CCO of our own or whatever, and then stage 2 comes on board. Is there an exit and re-entry procedure, or are we locked into saying at stage 2, if we go forward, then that's stage 2 forever?
I'm going to call on Sinead again, who's our commercial lawyer.
Sorry, so if I'm clear, you're asking that if you commit to stage 1 and a decision is made to advance to stage 2, are you committed to advancing to stage 2 when at that time?
Yeah. Or stay as an individual CCO, but still take advantage of the infrastructural development clauses without the ownership. Stage 2 must include transfer of assets.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Still to be negotiated.
Still to be, okay. So there's, okay.
Just, yeah, because ultimately at the end of the day, assets don't determine your borrowing ability. It's your revenue because the assets are not realisable. I just want to make one point, if I may, with your tolerance, Susan, in the uniqueness of the Waikato, and that is, if you consider it, catchments have iwi governance structures already existing. The Waikato Waipa, the River Authority, the Hauraki Co-Governance Committee, and the Hauraki Golf Forum. So there's an opportunity here in our view that strategic relationships can be formed with those current iwi co-governance structures that don't have to till new ground in developing different co-governance relationships. So I lay that on the table simply as a matter of interest, and I don't believe that situation exists for any other region in the country.
Yeah, thanks for that, Don. Lou.
I'm very, very happy to look at recommendation 4. I think it suitably covers what we would be proceeding with this. Okay, well, it says participating, we have a heads of agreement. I think that's a good idea for us to go in, and we are not locked into anything. We are able to discuss and listen to that chance that you said with all those other participating bodies. I think that's an excellent part of it. We need to be aware of what's around us and the parameters that we have to operate within. And so I would like to formally move that we accept.
No, we're not at that point. Yeah, Lou, sorry, we're not at that point.
Okay, it is a workshop, but I do feel that we need to proceed with this.
Okay, so.
Very strongly. Okay, I'll take the clarification, But I do feel that we need to proceed with this. It's good.
Yeah, Lou, I'll just stop you there. Our next steps, as set out on one of the slides, was our 27th of August full council meeting, when a paper will be brought by staff along with these recommendations. We'll have a comprehensive, robust, I imagine, debate around the merits and pitfalls potentially of the recommendations that have been contained in here. So that's the time for our debate. But today was an opportunity for Vaughan and Don and team to come and present the work that they've diligently been doing at the behest of the Mayoral Forum through CoLab. So if there are any other questions for these gentlemen, Claire, last one.
Well, it's really the staff report, because I see the scope of responsibilities on page 37 of our agenda or diligent. I'd be interested in staff comment on those tasks or activities that we currently do, like capital works delivery, program management, procurement, consenting, which, you know, it's been said that we do quite well. I'd be interested to know what staff think of whether or not it would be good to keep that in-house, or whether there are advantages in going to a shared CCO model. If that could be covered in that report, I'd really appreciate it.
Oh, Dawn's nodding her head, so yep, that's covered. So whilst we have these wise people in the room, are there any other questions that you wish to ask of them in respect of their presentation and the work that they've done? Definitely food for thought, and it's been simmering along for many, many, many years now. So I'm pleased that we're kind of at this point that we've got a proposition that provides us some freedom and independence, but potentially the benefit of collaboration rather than competing, as Andrew has indicated.
We're back to the future.
Yeah, a little bit back to the future-ish. But
You know, benefiting from what's gone beyond.
yeah. Thank
So
you.
thank you for coming, presenting.
Well, thank you for your courtesy and also your time, Mayor Susan. We really do appreciate it and the respect you've shown. I think arguably some of this work that we're proposing probably needs to be done as part of the development of the water services plan. So I know Dawn will be all across that, and obviously we'll give you independent advice regards that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Look, thank you very much for that, and we will break for lunch before we come back for our next workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good. Good, worthwhile discussion.
My
Thanks, Zoe. Look, welcome back everybody to our afternoon workshops. The first of these today is one in respect of our annual residents perception survey, and we have George Nat here with us. You've all received the memo, internal memo there in respect of this matter. So I will pass the mantle over to George. Nice to see you.
Kia ora. Just get Zoe to pop it up on screen. Cool. All right, thank you. All right, so Susan's obviously introduced the topic and you've had some pre-reading associated with it, including a more detailed action plan. So what I was going to do today was just run through some key points I want to make over a handful of slides and then open it up for you to ask questions or have discussion as you would like. So just by way of introduction, this is the 8th year of the survey, so we're starting to get some quite good longitudinal trends or results going on that we can look at interventions and what happens over time. I guess what I wanted to say here is this is an opportunity to listen to our residents in a representative, unbiased sample. It's one avenue of feedback. We need to also look at it in the context of other avenues of feedback that we receive, but it really allows us to take a pulse of the community on a quarterly basis, and then we obviously consolidate and look at it annually. So from my perspective, perceptions are important. They do influence our interpretation of our environment and how we behave and the decisions that we make, and how our residents may choose to communicate and interact with us. The survey itself, just to a little bit of an overview of the methodology. So it's a mixture of postal and online. We do it quarterly to try to remove as much bias as we can in terms of things that may be happening out in the community. It's a representative sample taken off the electoral roll, which our supplier believes is the best way at this point in time to get a representative sample across our community from both a demographic and a geographic way. And just as well, we are waiting on a benchmark report against about 18 other councils to understand how we're performing against the sector, and we'll receive that in about mid-September. So just to move through, I think it's important that we understand the context of this year's results. Oh, I am there. Am I going to go through? Oh, now I've gone past it. All right, so if we just think back the last 2 to 3 years, we have had a declining trend previously. That was in particular last year, and that some of that was a continued decline from the years prior. And there did appear to be in those results an erosion of trust and confidence in council. What we discussed last year was the work plan through the LTP and as an organisation, and I guess we talked about the fact that we thought it positively responded to the results from the community. It included a focus on the 3 Rs of roading, recycling and rubbish. And we also talked extensively about taking a more strategic approach to our communication and engagement with the community. While we focused on those aspects, it would be fair to say it was another challenging year for council and the community. The change in government did result in a number of reforms being revoked or changed, and we're still in a level of uncertainty around what the outcomes might be. The current, the economic climate, it continues to be and was over the last year quite challenging, with affordability challenges for our community. And rates, as signalled earlier in the year, have increased. We're continuing as a council to having to take very prudent financial management in regards to our financials, and obviously that resulted in the enhanced annual plan and the decision to pause a number of key flagship projects. And obviously throughout the community too, we have, some, I guess, what you'd call change fatigue out in the community in regards to a number of elements that we also need to consider. So that's the background context. That's where we were at when we were heading into this year. And just real high level results. So I'm not going to go into this in detail. You've received the report and you've received the verbatims. Really, it's a positive outcome. There were higher results across most metrics within the report. Overall satisfaction increased. Now, I recognise that not all of these results are statistically significant and doesn't fully offset, I guess, some of the decline that we've seen previously, but it is a really positive result. And it does sort of indicate that there's been a shift and out in the community in terms of increasingly trusting the council and appreciating the efforts that council is making. There were a significant increase in a number of areas from a statistical perspective, and they were around road safety, recycling, litter control, and around the convenience of making an inquiry and operating in a way that was fair. Our reputation benchmark also increased and it remains within the acceptable level. And also those cohorts within our community that we consider, that we look at as either skeptics or champions of council moved in the right direction as well. So that cohort of champions increase, and the community spirit also showed an increase as well. So overall, the results that are heading in the right direction over the course of the year. Just having a look at the key verbatim themes that came through. So 27% of comments related to road and infrastructure. That was still the top concern of residents, and that has remained the top concern over the last 2 to 3 years. Very much a sentiment around prioritising spending on core infrastructure, so emphasising the need for council to prioritise overall roading and allocate rates towards improving roading infrastructure certainly came through in the verbatim themes. Overall, a sentiment of just being very cognizant of growth and the effect that it has on the communities and having to manage that really well as a council. Concerns about high rates. Definitely still coming through was the desire to have a provision of a wider range of waste services was very, very loud and clear. And just diving a bit deeper into some of it too, there were some demographic differences. So there are some cohorts, in particular the older cohorts tended to be more satisfied with opportunities to participate in decision making and sort of a more of an overall expression of satisfaction. And Cambridge residents did demonstrate a significantly higher level of pride in living within the ward. So there are some demographic considerations. I mean, also in these key verbatim themes, there were many, many positive comments that came through about council as well. So I think we really need to just stop and recognise that too. So looking forward, so what does this all mean? And I guess you've got a much more, you do have a detailed action plan. I guess the overall theme is, and I think this is where we were going last year, is we really do believe that the current trajectory of initiatives through the enhanced annual plan and our business plans, and in regards to things like our management practices, risk, etc., are definitely helping to address some of the feedback that we're getting from our community through this survey. Talking about things like the implementation of the priorities areas of the anchor institution framework, seeking to embed council further, building those stronger collaborative connections with our community stakeholders and our partners. I think Ahuaki, that continued push and engagement with Ahuaki is certainly something in regards to showing leadership, etc., to our community. Adoption of the long-term plan and continuing to make those robust, transparent decisions and really concentrating on the financial sustainability of council. Very much the continued focus, as I've said before, in management practices, the illustration of a robust financial management and risk assurance practices definitely came out in the priority levers that they were looking for council to pull, and that's very much they want to see council as being very good in the financial management sphere and providing value for money to the community. And then again, just really highlighting that continued delivery of council's communication and engagement strategy and the direction that Lisa and her team is taking council in regards to that activity. I did want to highlight an opportunity that did come through the report, and I think it really did emphasise that need to engage with youth, specifically in our community. I thought that came out quite strongly in some of the differences in perceptions associated with aspects that we were looking at. So overall, I mean, my recommendation is that the current trajectory and looking at, that particular area is certainly the right thing for council to be doing. But then just looking ahead, we also need to just make sure that we have our risk management practices correct and that we are managing things prudently as we go through our long-term planning process. We do have a number of what we could call headwinds. So we still do have, and continue will for some time, a constrained financial environment, and those conversations around balancing investment and consideration of affordability with our community. Our central government directives and reforms, so there's still a high level of uncertainty out there in terms of what the outcomes are going to be. And in some instances, those directives that are imposed upon council that we don't necessarily have a huge amount of control over. Again, just working with the community and that communication and engagement really important in regards to the change fatigue seen out there and what our infrastructure program looks like and what is visible out there in the community and what we're doing in regards to our capital works. And then I'll just point out there too, just the local government elections that will be occurring in 12 to 18 months' time. So it's a very good news story, I believe, in terms of an upturn, but there's a long road to go and some challenges that we're all aware of. Just some next steps. So this report will go up on council's website today, this afternoon. The results are within council's annual report. You can see that they directly feed into our organisational KPIs and how we are responding over the next year, and they will be closely monitored and reported back through to you. There's obviously consideration of the sentiment within the survey as you develop the 25 to 34 LTP and how you go about the management of risk. And just there too, in terms of just reiterating again, that benchmark will be available in about a month's time just to get a better understanding of what is happening across the sector. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thanks, George. Roger.
Yeah, thanks, George. Just an initial question. When you go back to the randomness of the survey, and I noticed that some of the results you are able to establish geographic trends, but is it a totally random survey that you subsequently look at geographic location, or the number of responses, do you ensure geographical balance in terms of those that are approached to participate in the survey?
Yes. Now, I think I have this right. So basically it is completely randomised off the electoral roll. And then once they get those final results back, they compare the weightings, the demographic and geographic weightings against the census data and look to see if they need to do any weightings of the results. The comment from the research provider is that we will note that the geographic and demographic profile basically was the same as the census data, so they did absolutely minor weightings. So therefore, that from them, that is evidence that this is a robust process. And are those stats available? I tried to look through to see if I could find them, but I couldn't. Yep. Could you point me to where the geographic detail of the response? Yes, so it is in the report on page 65 of the annual report itself. Good, thank you. Yeah.
Claire.
Thanks, George. It was a real pleasure to read this. And I really appreciate all the work that's been put in by staff and councillors actually to, achieve these outcomes, especially, the improvement that's been seen. Yeah, and I think too that I was really pleased that I just think this has been very valuable. You know, like we've sort of tried to refine it and get it to be a good fit for purpose report. And I had a lot of confidence in the responses because, you know, I thought the questions are good and the topics and, you know, that independence or that randomness across the district that reflects, yeah, the population is good. I thought it was a great endorsement of our mayor and the efforts that she's been made to, you know, lead us, you know, in what she sees as a new direction with, you know, better engagement with the community, more approachable and yeah. And so I just want to say congratulations. I think it shows that. Yeah. And I also wondered whether or not Ahuaki has also contributed to the success. Yeah, yeah, so well done to that team. And lastly, I did note that there's been an increase in satisfaction among Māori residents year on year, and that was really around image and reputation, leadership, trust, and, you know, going in the right direction. And I'd just like to say perhaps that might be something that our Māori Ward Councillor has contributed to. Yeah, the fact that we do have Māori representation around the table, and I think we've been able to, you know, get, I suppose, more input thanks to her, you know, with cultural perspectives, and in a way it reflects the Ahuaki operational model too. Yeah, so overall, it was good reading, and yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I think you touched on a lot of things I was going to say, except the bit about me, because it's actually it's a team effort, right? And it's around this table and it's in the buildings, you know. And I guess before we don't want to congratulate ourselves too much, because there is an awful lot of work still to do. We're all mindful of that. But look, I was delighted to see the uptick, and I think it's evidence of our honest reflection on how we can do better. As not just elected members, but as a whole organisation. I think hopefully this is bearing that out on many places for a lot of reasons, as Claire has covered. So, Roger.
Thinking about the age that we're talking about, I thought it was the 18 to 29-year-olds that we needed to target.
Oh.
Interestingly, Roger, there is in terms of that demographic, there is quite a significant uptick, I believe, in satisfaction. As I recall reading the papers, there were a decrease in satisfaction in terms of that youth space, which absolutely breaks my heart, but I'm determined to try and crack that nut. But certainly there seems to be a favourable movement in the older group, which I take heart in, which is a great thing. Bruce.
George, just on your key results you've got on about the fourth bullet point, most residents know where to access council information, 66%, but only 30% perceive that it's clear and easy to understand. Has any work been done with that? That's quite an interesting comment, that they must find it hard to, you know, to understand what's there.
Yes, there is, because considerable work happening in that space. Lisa, do you want to make a comment? in regards to the work you're doing on the website and information being easier to understand or access?
Yeah, sure. Through you, Madam Chair, we're in the process of undertaking a complete website content review, and that means the realignment of pages as well, and aligning it with best practice in terms of the way that people want to navigate the website and find the information, and trying to make sure that that's as digestible as possible.
Can I just add to that a little bit too, Lisa? Some of the information on our website was a little bit dated too, so it's a really great opportunity to refresh and update it all too. Any other questions or comments for George in terms of her report? Lou?
Yeah, I just looked at communication and engagement, and I see that we're talking of 54% of residents responded that they got articles in the newspaper. We've got to realise that most articles in the newspaper are a bit negative, or they have a particular slight on an issue. They weight things a little bit differently. And I just wondered whether we need to look at social media or other ways, or newsletters, but perhaps just try and negate that a bit. It is something that I know we've inherited it, and we do get it from particularly, but yeah, just something to look at. It's an interesting figure, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Brown. So I'll just get Lisa to respond to that as well, because she's actively doing work in that space.
So again, through the chair, we've actually reintroduced and introduced a number of new channels in terms of the way that we're communicating with the community. One of them is a monthly e-newsletter, which people can subscribe to. We are now taking fortnightly pages in both the Cambridge and Te Awamutu newspapers in order to share some of our positive stories. You may have seen the reels that we are now compiling on a weekly basis to inform people of what's happening in their community. So there is a lot happening in that space.
Philip.
Thank you, and thanks for your report too. And just on communication engagement, I mean, we've got obviously various ages of population out there, and some will be better with social media and some will want engagement and things like that. So obviously it's just a real happy medium, and there's been a lot of burning issues out there, and the community have commented how poor the communication has been, or how they perceive it to be poor. And you know, in some cases, you know, maybe we're relying on communication or forms of communication more so than engagement. But it's obviously a work in progress and a real happy medium, and trying to get it right too. But especially with all the burning issues going out there at the moment. So, thanks for your report.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly a challenge, and I can see Lisa popping her head up, and she'd like to say something about that.
So recently we've realigned the communications and engagement team to have an events and engagement delivery team to put more of a focus on engagement. And some of our KPIs for the next year will be around participatory democracy and investigating what that looks like for us as an organisation. So there will be a lot more engagement going forward.
Cool. Damarie.
Through the chair, tēnā koe Georgie, ngā mihi mō tō repoata I tēnei wiki. Thank you. Just can you talk to me a little bit around that column, strong feedback against Māori polls? It's received in there.
What I was referring, sorry, what I was referring to there is, sorry, what I was referring to there is council's sentiment in terms of the change of legislation.
Any other questions for George, or comments, observations? Like Peter, you're looking like you do look like you want to say something. You've sat around this table long enough to know that you've got a burning thing sitting in there. There you go.
I've got a cold, so I'm a bit quiet. No, I was just going to say just a couple of personal things. One was highest satisfaction, I think I've got this right, was Maungatautari, and leadership was Maungatautari. So Councillor Monty, you're doing a good job over there.
Oh, I thought the opposite. I got quite depressed.
It was it was a mix of both.
Page 113 of your report. Just
I'm
go,
going to take that. I'll look at it.
your leadership is impeccable.
Monty.
Just a quick question about your headlines over waves, that page. Is that reporting the blues and the reds? Blues are positive and reds are negatives for each question. Is that what that is getting at?
Sorry, can you just?
Page 7 of your report, page 7 of 17. Headlines over waves. Just explain if I'm interpreting that right.
Yes, you are. So blue is good, red is not good.
Yeah, so the net result is the median of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions for George? No?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Andrew.
This is probably, what's happened with our overall sewage system? It's the one thing that's gone down by, page, whatever it is. Sorry, it's in the trends.
Yes, it was a significant decline in satisfaction with that. I don't know, Dawn, if you have any insights to help us there?
Yeah, I couldn't think of anything myself that would lead to it.
Through your worship, no, I mean, it's perplexing for us as well because we don't have dry weather overflows. We have very few overflows at all. We've put out a lot of good positive news stories about the Cambridge wastewater treatment plant, the work that's going on there. We can only imagine that it is a hangover from a national conversation. As happens around speed limits or some of those sorts of things, is that people get caught up by that. But yeah, we're perplexed as well.
And I might suggest also that there've been like other incidents in the country that may have tainted people's thinking around spill into Taupo and obviously issues in Queenstown and those sorts of things. But that's kind of where I went in my head on this one. Liz, can you add anything further?
I was looking at that as well because that perplexed me. I have a theory. When I looked at the breakdown of people who were surveyed, there was a large number from Parongia. Okay, if you looked at 89 Parongia people, 86 actually, and 174 people from Cambridge. So just to give you a perspective, so quite a higher number than usual, I think, responded from Parongia or part of that. And of course, they don't have one. So I said, my theory is that they want one. So it could be that, it might not be, don't know.
Yeah, it's a fair analysis to make, to be fair. Any other comments? Roger.
Another clarification. The scalar that we use for responses, is that just a 3-factor scalar?
No.
Highly satisfied?
No, it goes from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10. I'd need to double check. And so when we talk about the people that are very satisfied, they're in that 8 to 10 range.
Mm.
Yeah, so it is a high benchmark. Other councils will go slightly lower than that, but my perspective has also always been it's about trends versus the actual number over a longitudinal study.
But I agree with you. But then there's a lot of information to be gained as to what the movement is of those beneath that 8 to 10 level that, if we're seeing a distinct movement up, then that's a really positive thing as we're getting more and more people getting closer to being satisfied, whereas we're not getting that information through from this. And I just feel that, where you've got, let's say, an overall satisfaction 4 years ago, 40%, and now 23%, although 23% is growing, are we getting more people that are moving closer to that point? Would be interesting for me, which you're going to see if you actually include more of that 10-point scalar into, greatly satisfied, mostly satisfied, couldn't read in the middle, lightly unsatisfied and grossly unsatisfied. I'm just picking figures out,
Yeah.
descriptors out of the thin air, but
So I'm happy to ask that question, councillor Gordon, and come back to you on that because it's quite a technical question. I would need to go back to our supplier on.
yeah, thank you.
Roger, are you meaning like putting a greater gradient within that?
Oh, I still think
Discussion.
keep the ultimate as 8 to 10.
Yeah.
But you see, if you were to say 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, there might have been movement from the 2 to 3, 3 to 4 band up to the 4 to 5, and from the 4 to 5 up to the 7 to 8. So a gradual movement towards more satisfaction. But similarly, there could have been the other way, but I think it's that kind of information, just having a look at, and I agree that our goal should be as many people as possible being totally satisfied.
Cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Claire.
Yeah, just a minor point. I'm really rapt to see that there's an action plan in response to this, because I felt that's been missing in the past. And just on the youth engagement thing, so I'd like to see some initiatives targeting that 18 to 29-year-old age group. The only thing that was mentioned in the report was the Careers Expo, which is actually for school age kids. Yeah, and so I'd love to, have the staff put their thinking caps on, think how we can, connect with that age group. Yeah, that older, young adult.
Boy, have I got a deal for you. No, this has been a piece of work that's been ongoing for a very long time. I instigated at the moment after the election, and Sally will provide us with an update. It has been challenged, but Sally will be able to give us a quick update there.
Kia ora tātou. So recently in a Friday mail out, we identified some work that Corinne is leading in terms of the youth engagement work. And one of the first opportunities was going along to the Careers Expo, which was a fantastic opportunity to connect with people who are looking for opportunities post their school lives and their careers are going to take on. There has already also been another engagement opportunity within the community around linking with youth, what they see of councils and questions around engagement with council. And Corinne is developing a whole nother suite of engagement with different organisations to gather that age bracket we're talking about to get understanding of their connection with council. Once that's completed, that will be pulled back and reported back in terms of what those opportunities look like and how we can start implementing, whether it's coming out with a youth panel that we've had before. The youth awards are part of that process as well. So we're early in the process, but just need to get out there and get those conversations happening.
Philip.
Yeah, and just on that, it was really great being aware that Careers Expo was on last week or the other week and things like that, which a couple of us went to. So being notified of that or informed of that in future of other events like that is really good. I went along to the town hall last week too, where the high school were hosting a takeover. It was called Takeover, and they've got another one coming up in a couple of weeks' time where of being involved in the community and in the town, around the town hall and things like that too. So yeah, being aware of those things through our mail out, that was really good. With the Careers Expo, that was really good.
So we will continue to do that. So you have the opportunity also to come in and talk as well and be part of those processes. Critically, one of the things, and I think it's coming through the survey as well, is that awareness of our youth of what council does and how they can be involved. And I think that's critically in terms of the mayor's aspirations, is to actually have a lot more youth around our table telling us how they want to input, how they want to be involved. And that's part of building that process now and how we can achieve that.
Yeah, it's sort of about establishing relevance, right? But yeah, so Philip, did you have something else to add?
Just on that takeover, it says in here that once a month a group of the high school students are turning out at the town hall, and saying to come and hang out with us. This is a grand old building, and it's looking forward to having young people of Cambridge take it over and make that is safe, make it a safe space. So that's what it's got in here. So there's a website,
Cool.
email.
Cool, thanks for sharing that, Philip. Now, I think we've had pretty comprehensive discussion about the highlights, some of the lowlights. But look, I think, look, as I said before, I was pleased to get this report. It was a pretty a low period of time last year when we received the report and having to field being grilled by Marianne Gill actually on it. I remember sitting there with Gary feeling quite anxious. But look, whilst we haven't solved all the problems by any stretch of the imagination, I'm heartened by the uptick there. And as you say, it is about trends. Let's not get too excited until we see some, sustained improvement, I guess. And there's still a lot more work to do, but it starts with one survey, right? So I'm hoping that is the case for us here in Waipa. So thank you, George, and thank you, Lisa, for your input there too, and Sally. Thank you very much, Lee. Now, our next workshop is the 24-25 Local Government Members Determination Review. This is one of Joe's. She's on her way. Just
Here she is.
here she is. I was going to say hold that thought, but here she is. Hi, Joe. The floor is yours. Oh, and David, look at that. I didn't know you were going to be here. You're not on my list. Nice to see you. Everybody needs a stats guy.
Good afternoon. So I've just got a presentation here this afternoon. We've had a request received from the Remuneration Authority to collect some feedback from you. So that's been sent round to you, the letter and the table. So you can have worked through that. I think that went out about 10 days ago. So this is the kind of purpose today of kind of collecting that feedback from you. So they've kind of at the end of the letter that they sent out, they identified 3 areas that they wanted feedback on. One was factors and data that they used to determine the governance pool, to see if you had any thoughts on that. Time spent on council work for each role, and then any feedback on other allowances and fees. So just a bit of a reminder about where things sit with the governance pool that was introduced back in 2019. Just a point to remember, so the Remuneration Authority set that governance pool and what we're able to pay as part of that, but that is actually funded by the ratepayer. So the size of the governance pool that each council get, they've developed a size index where they rank councils from kind of Christchurch down to the smallest council, and the factors that they use to determine those ratings and where everyone sits on the list are population at 50%, total assets at 15%, total OPEX at 20%, and social/economic deprivation at 15%. So that's what they currently do and how it currently operates. So they have asked for some feedback in terms of if there are any other ideas that anyone has about those particular factors and weightings. One thing to remember when we are kind of considering any additional factors or weightings, that they need to be publicly available, that information in the data, and it needs to be applied across the country to every single council. It can't be information that is available to one council in one area and not available to the other. It's got to be consistent nationwide. So that may limit some of the factors.
Claire.
Yeah, so I'm not guaranteeing that it would be easily available, but something that makes a big impact on how much time I devote to council is the number of collaborative groups that we become part of. Yeah, so yeah, because that's been a sort of an evolutionary thing, you know, over the years that I've been on council, because they are often across the sub-region, or, you know, like regional groups, or they might involve Māori groups as well as council groups or sector groups. But they're normally large groups and they have large agendas and they have long meetings. Yeah. So I don't know, you know, and I'm expecting it to increase because we are moving into a more collaborative space. Yeah. But Joe, I can't guarantee that it would be easy to get that data.
No, no, and it needs to be something that's available annually, but information on that will feed into that other element of the review where they were requesting information on, which was about time spent by councillors. So we can capture that as part of that. So I did ask Mr. Totman, David Totman here to have a to help in terms of looking at any other additional factors or weightings that we could use and maybe suggest and put forward. So I will hand over to David to talk about those.
So the one area where we could use population information a bit differently, and it is available across all councils because it's Statistics NZ information, and that is our increasing aging cohort. You'll all be aware it's not a problem that's kind of specific to Waipa, but Waipa, of all the surrounding districts, has probably a greater share in terms of the age group older than 65 and what's projected in the future. So it is something to bear in mind because your post-65 group are generally pensioners on fixed income, and they will become an increasingly dependent component of our population. So they, rather than contributing economically, well, directly in terms of income, they will demand council services. Anyway, that's household income. Yeah, the household income one is probably more related to the cost of living in Waipa. I think you've all seen those housing affordability reports, and the information in there kind of indicates it's expensive living in Waipa, more than our surrounding districts, more even than Hamilton. It kind of doesn't at face value makes a lot of sense, but it's a burden for our communities.
Monty, then Roger.
Just David, those last 2 points you made about the increasing number of beneficiaries and cost of living, are they arguments in favour of a lower governance pool? Is that where you're going with them?
Yeah, they would, they indicate council has to do more with less. Yeah.
Roger.
Yeah, thank you. I thought this was really interesting, and through misreading the information, I sent mine directly to the Commission, but it doesn't make any difference. But I think, and it really has pointed it out to me, say in this last period, the amount of work that we as councillors in Waipa have had to do, documentation, the amount of reading, the number of meetings that we've had, and that's time related. The evaluation of the amount of fund to each local authority is based 50% on population. And that's resulted, say, and I don't know the exact figure, but let's say our adjacent city council and their huge population has established quite an considerable governance figure that means that the average payment per councillor is two and a half times 3 times what we as Waipa councillors get. And I would suggest that the amount of time and consideration and involvement as we have to put in, because we're a smaller population, but we still put the time in, we still put the energy in, and it doesn't, that population breakdown doesn't really reflect on the amount of time that we have to put in to achieve the same governance outcomes. I don't know how you solve that, but the fact that it's very much based on population difference means that automatically the funds are going to be greater.
Following from that, the way you could moderate the absolute population numbers with whether it's growing or not, because growth adds an enormous workload to council, I believe. So if potentially you're asking for other things that could be considered growth, for me is an obvious one.
Growth is certainly a massive driver, absolutely. But it's kind of looking at the nature of that growth. So we don't meet the kind of usual aging population profile in terms of not having school-going children or declining school roll. We don't have that. We actually have a growing role. But we also have that aging, the growth that they're not just people aging in place, they're people moving into Waipa to retire.
Most of the people moving into Waipa to retire actually have a reasonable amount of money. Otherwise, they can't afford to come here to retire. And to a degree, having made Waipa an attractive place to live, that's why house prices are, that's, people want to come here, demand, supply and demand. And yeah, so, I mean, as I said earlier, you weren't here, David. I mean, the way to solve our affordable housing crisis is make Cambridge a shit place to live.
Yeah.
That's going to be a great headline.
Clearly that is facetious, but I mean, it is it's a kind of supply and demand situation that we had.
Right. Is anybody going to brave enough to answer that one? No. Any other observations to make in respect of other additional factors that we could consider here? No. Okay. You may as well continue.
I think those are things that you would like to put forward. We have previously talked to the Rem Authority about kind of growth before and using building consent statistics as a measure. Sometimes that can fluctuate though, so that has been the issue with using that as a measure of growth. But in terms of measuring growth, it does need to be more your type of information that's available from Stats NZ type scenario. I mean, we don't have to provide any feedback on this. We could say at this point we're quite happy with how that works.
I've got, sorry, Roger, I've got Dale Marie here and then you, Roger. Sorry.
Kia ora, Joe, kia ora. I'm just wondering whether there can be a comment added to anything that gets fed back, just if Māori wards, for some of those councils that will get through with Māori wards in the future, if there can be a bit more of a lens on those wards, because usually, like this ward, covers the entire district as opposed to one ward. And if there could be some consideration around what remuneration could look like for a ward member who covers their entire district as opposed to just one ward. So yeah, kia ora tātou.
Yeah, I suppose, some councils have a number of Māori ward councillors. They do, and I mean, and we do have, those likes of those people that have those councillors elected at large. So they're still kind of covering. I mean, we can certainly make the comment, but
for those councillors, yeah. For this council.
Yeah, I think that what's relevant is that there's one,
yeah,
not two, to share the load, yes, I think that's relevant to this council. for
Yeah,
sure.
and that would be something in terms of when you're making a decision on how to distribute the governance pool. That you know, that would probably be the thing that the remuneration authority would be looking for, is for you to reflect that in that distribution decision that you make. But we can also provide the feedback.
Yeah, and it's easier to, we can more appropriately remunerate if your pool's bigger, where we're trying to go with this, right?
Yeah. Good.
Roger, then Mike.
Yeah. As far as I understand it, and from those grids that you've provided, then the whole of the fund, or the determination of the fund, is totally variable, dependent on the analysis of those factors. I'm wondering whether a suggestion could be to actually start with a base fixed consideration of, say, a minimum response equivalent to an amount of the national average salary. And then on top of that, then the variable fund becomes the add-on reflecting the difference. And that would better reflect the fact that there is within all councils a base requirement to fulfill a function, which in many cases is similar. We just talk about different dollar amounts. So whether in fact a base fixed amount first and then a variable figure on top could be a different way of looking at the total calculation of the remuneration fund.
Yeah, I suppose one of the complicating factors to just bear in mind is that the governance pool and that whole process of how they set the rem is not dependent on how many councillors you have. So that would, yeah, and then every time there was a representation review, it would all need to be revisited, whereas the remuneration authority's position very much at the moment is, you know, we're not remunerating based on how many councillors you have. That is this, it's about a pool and you making decisions about how that's distributed. Okay. So there's not, and that, so that would kind of go against how that process is currently set up, which is, we can provide that feedback if you would like.
I'm not looking like there's lots of agreement around the table on that one, or ambivalence. Mike?
Just a point of clarification, when the remuneration authority sets the pool amount, does it all have to be allocated from the inverted commas day one? Does it? All right, it does. Right. Oh, yeah.
So there's nothing that's kind of come out strongly to provide feedback on? No,
I don't think
you're
so.
fine.
Right, move on with the next one, I guess.
Right, so this is where we need to look at.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
The roles, and what they've asked for is a percentage of full-time equivalent. So kind of a ratio. So I sent around in that thing. So we need to kind of collect everybody's information. Did people manage to have a look at that and do any calculations, or do you need to provide that to me offline? Or
Joe, when do you want that back? What's the?
It did say in the mail out that we'd have 2 weeks to do it. Like I was going to.
I saw 30th of August somewhere.
Yeah, I thought we had at least another week, if not.
yeah, no, I think I did talk about getting it back for today, but if people haven't done it, then we will need to have that. You can feed that back to me. I would just need to be aware that those people that, because it's done by positions, not people, if, like, for example, Bruce, Councillor Thomas and Councillor Montgomery are both councillor appointed to community board and also deputy chair, we've got one answer on that, so you'll need to get together and provide an answer on that. And councillor appointed to community board, that's Councillor Al Brown and Councillor Pettit. So will need one answer from the two of you. So if you can work those out between you.
So you can just halve Mike and I, so just you'll sort it out, it'll be an average.
Yeah, we can average.
Just a question through you, Madam Chair.
It's in the Friday mail out.
Just a quick question, Joe. Would you be able to just flick that to my home address? Because I can't print off this particular device. My printer doesn't link.
But we can get printed copies for you to
Yeah, I
take
just
away
want a
today if
copy,
that's
that's all.
easier.
Yeah, I tried to download.
Yeah.
Get
I
some
couldn't get it
printed
off.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get that done now.
This was in our Friday mail out, and it was the bit that I mentioned the other day. But it is a little bit awkward if you don't have printers and stuff. So that would be helpful if you could do that.
Yeah, we'll get them printed.
And the letter did say that the responses were to be returned by the Friday, the 30th of August, but that's to them. So I guess Joe's wanting to have them collated prior so she can flick them on. But there is still time there.
Right, and so then this is just a bit of a run through because they've also asked if there's any feedback on any of the allowances that are paid. So I'm not really going to run through those in any detail. The latest determination order was sent out to you. So we had motor vehicles, vehicle kilometre allowance and travel time allowance.
My view on that, the kilometres, I think is fine, adequate level. Same with the IT allowance. I don't have a problem with that either.
Yep, so nothing to the contrary on that one. Yeah, that's the IT, childcare and hearings fee.
Childcare, I wouldn't know, sorry.
Just on the mileage, I just want to say as an EV owner, I used to get the IRD standard rate, which was the same for petrol and EVs like last year. And now I've got to pay road user charges as well. So my on-road costs have increased significantly, and so I probably deserve more than 1.04 cents per kilometre. Just saying.
Right, everyone right now break out their violins.
I've never heard that argument before.
Oh dear.
I don't think anyone's taking you seriously.
No sympathy, no sympathy.
Then we had hearings fees. So, so what in terms of we'll be looking to go back with in terms of really, because there wasn't any kind of strong feedback on the factors, so we'll just be going back with that table completed with everyone's percentage of FTE. And obviously it's kind of difficult at this point in time because we don't know what any quantum increase might be if they look to reimburse more based on the FTE equivalent that's come back. So that question is.
May I ask a question on that?
Yes, Roger.
Are we talking about the average hourly commitment expressed as a percentage FTE over our normal week of work? Or are we talking about it on an annual basis, which takes into consideration the July break and the Christmas break? I would think it would be the average weekly commitment.
Yeah, well, see, percentage of FTE, obviously, normal, well, as a working employee, will have holidays and breaks as well. And as well particularly kind of during the July, you may not have had meetings, but you will have had other things happening like constituents contacting you and various other.
2 and 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning.
So
yes.
There are other things going on in July as well.
That's what happens when you're in Europe, Roger, and your constituents aren't in Europe.
Right.
Excellent.
Thank you.
That's then. So, yeah, get your forms in, people. That would be most helpful. And that brings to an end our workshops for today. Thank you very much, team.